Hello, I'm Toycat, welcome back to the second channel video. So it's not exactly a secret that this COVID-19 thing everyone's talking about has been growing quite a bit. Here is a map of the cases that, as you can see, looks like this as of just a couple of months ago, and if you move the clock forward to today, it looks more like this. As you can see, it is spread to pretty much every region of the world, with Africa being a pleasant exception for once, but it's spread to pretty much every region of the world, in some cases much more seriously than others, but we have a big epidemic spreading across the world, and for the first time in the history of modern travel, it's starting to be, impacting the governmental decisions. We spoke about, just a couple of days ago, how India has shut down their tourist program, Kuwait had shut down their only major airport, the US had blocked travel from Europe, but over the past couple of days alone, we've seen an unprecedented number of countries all following one another as far as how they react to it in a way that is quite shocking. And I'll start with Argentina. I'm using the Gov UK site when we're talking about UK residents, as well as a bunch of other sites, during the course of this video, because lots of countries have shut down their, borders. It's not just Argentina, but it extends into a bunch more. We got Croatia, we got Israel, we got Singapore, we got Malta. I'll go through all of them today because it's a surprising number of countries in just the last couple of days that have shut down. But we'll start with Argentina because there is an ongoing outbreak of COVID-19, but cases have been confirmed in other countries, including Argentina. But basically, he said there's a 30-day suspension of all international flights from the UK, as well as Europe, the US, China, Japan, South Korea, and Iran. I mean, not that there were any direct flights between Iran and Argentina anyway, but it's going to come into force in just a couple of days now, which is crazy. All international flights, the amount of, the amount you're talking right there, because also the cargo capacity that's going to be dropped as a result of that. But also we're talking about countries like Croatia, within the EU, they've done the exact same thing. It's not quite as stringent here because it's just a 14-day self-isolation period for all foreign nationals arriving from a bunch of European countries, plus China, Japan, Korea, and Singapore. Again, the countries in Asia with the highest amount of it. You can see the same thing going for Israel, which is not really a European country, but kind of follows a lot of their rules for fun reasons that I'm sure you can realize based on the fact that the first thing on this page is still advising against going to Gaza before talking about the huge, thing right now. But basically, effective as of yesterday, visitors entering Israel from overseas will be subject to home quarantine measures for 14 days. If you don't have a home to go to, it can't be a hotel, it's clear to mention. Don't have a home to go to, can't go to Israel unless you're willing to quarantine yourself for 14 days. That is crazy stuff. But then Singapore has blocked all travel, again, all new visitors with recent travel history at all, for the following regions in the 14 days will not be allowed entry in Singapore or even transit. This is huge. Singapore is a transit hub. One of their major, roles in the world is they are a transit hub for flight, for cargo, etc. My maps are frozen. But, that is the major thing that, Singapore is because of its strategic location, and it is shutting that down. That is how serious things have gone on that level. But it's not just those four countries. It's not just Argentina over here, Croatia over there, Israel there, Singapore. Relatively small countries on the global scale, you might be able to argue, because, Malta, another one of the same things. Guess what? Quarantine extended with fines of deportation being threatened if you mess it up, but also, as well as that, Czech Republic on the same thing. A lot of countries, including the UK, I'm mostly talking about UK countries here because obviously, fun fact, I travel and that's the thing that happens, as well as, the Czech Republic. Also, there's a lot of other, countries, including Cyprus, which have put the UK in category 2. Same self-quarantine thing for the next 14 days. Crazily enough, we also have Norway joining the list and being like, there is a strict ban on travel to and inside the country. All travelers and residents of Norway can get back to Norway, basically. But travelers from countries outside the Nordic region, because they have a Nordic passport region where basically they're all citizens of each other's country. But if they're not residents of Norway, they'll be asked to return to their home country if they're not, already in Norway, which means that everyone in Norway has to basically, be quarantined or get out, basically. It's a very, very scary and, crazy world we live in, because this also has been extended to Oman, and it's also been extended to Denmark. So the reason I mentioned Denmark as being a big deal, because I like the wording on this, because instead of just doing the generic politician thing of being like, hey, we're shutting down the borders because, Denmark, number one, everyone else sucks, we can get rid of them. Again, a lot of people want to shut down borders on nationalist reasons and are justifying the coronavirus as reasons to do so, which is terrifying because even a lot of people on the left are like, well, I'm just saying we shut the borders and clearly that'll get rid of this whole case. We don't need, why do we have borders anyway? I mean, it's like, why do we have border control? Why Why do we have access to our borders anyway? I guess is what people say. But basically, there's the quote from the Danish Prime Minister, Mette Frederiksen, said at the press conference that they're painfully aware this will have severe consequences for businesses and families. But the evidence suggests the extreme reaction is justified. They can see how it's developed in Italy, and everyone wants to jump ahead of it to avoid Italy happening to them. Italy, if you don't know, went very, very, very fast from having just a few cases that spread from China to now having more cases per million population. In fact, significantly more, both in the north region of Italy, but also in Italy as a whole. It is pretty terrifying when you put it in that level, that instead of this being a China-based issue, which it started as, China has stayed pretty flat in terms of cases, but instead it has rocketed in Italy. In the last 24 hours, by the way, is what new cases shows. In the last 24 hours alone, we've seen 2,500 new people be diagnosed with it, 250 people dying. That is a lot. This is all of a sudden gone from, this is an epidemic that is being solved, natural causes, to being like, holy Jesus, this is spread. And it's also interesting because this is an epidemic that has changed its entire scope. Again, at one point this was contained pretty much exclusively to China, where it's still very large number of people have it, and they're still, it's going to take some weeks to get them not having it, and the spread's going to happen even after that. Then it spread to being like Iran and China, and it also spread, like, Japan was like level 2 at one point, right? Like, Japan was, oh god, that's the second highest level of it. Japan was going to have to cancel the Olympics, etc., etc. But it's gone from just like, oh yeah, it's a few countries in Asia, to like, oh, it's in Italy, and then from Italy, it seems to have jumped across to, it jumped across indirectly as well, but it's jumped across, and it's now meant that it is now effectively a European crisis, right? There's no other way to look at this data. Obviously, Canada and the US are affected, even Justin Trudeau's wife, but this has become a European issue, and it's something I very briefly mentioned, and I kind of predicted as being the thing in my last video, if you didn't hear it. Basically, this is flowing pretty closely. It's correlating very closely with tourist numbers. Iran is the weird exception to that rule, because obviously Iran is a very hard country to get in and out of. But most open countries, most countries which have a huge tourist industry which rely on that, and a lot of people come in and out of, which mostly, excluding China where it started, of course, and Iran as the second hub. But the places where it's growing most are the places where most tourists spread in between, most travelers come in and out of, including the USA, because even though the US is very strict border policy, it is still a very visited country. You can see how pretty much every country that has rocketed up is a very popular tourist destination. You can almost, not one-to-one, but you can get a close correlation between countries you'd want to visit and countries that are high up in this list. Find the countries really low down this list. Are they the ones you want to go to? Like, I'm Sri Lankan, so I'm allowed to say this. Do you want to go to Sri Lanka? You probably don't. Paraguay? Was that at the top of your list? Moldova? Poor Lithuania. I don't want to make fun of you. So, Afghanistan, yeah. Planned a trip there. It sounds like a reductionist way to say it, but because this spreads with a 2-week period of you not knowing you have it, because of that being the key case right here, I think that is what's led to a lot of people going to and from these super, super busy international hubs of, again, London, of the Romes, of the Milans, of the Frankfurts, and the, Parises of the world, and that has led to a huge spike, which, by the way, again, I feel like is being slightly misrepresented, because even when you look at these numbers, like, there is 144,000 cases right now, which, by the way, it's again, in the last few days, that has gone a scary number. Although I think the more accurate map still to look at is this. But you can see we're about to reach another peak, a higher peak, most likely much higher peak than we've had before. But the interesting thing about this is the fact that in China, even though they have over half the cases, in terms of cases per million population, it's like Italy, Norway, Denmark, Switzerland, Bahrain, surprisingly, up there. But you can see how it's suddenly shifted to being a European problem. And I imagine, in the same way that countries like, by the way, Denmark is in the Schengen area, closing the border to other countries is something that is basically unprecedented and technically speaking isn't allowed without, it's like it's an EU thing they have to allow. Theoretically, they shouldn't be able to do it without permission. Same with Norway, same with, the Czech Republic and Cyprus. Both of these, all 4 of these countries are within the Schengen area, which means they have open borders with the rest of Europe, and now they have shut those borders down, which kind of, regardless of how this goes from now, there is a chance, I actually think this is now getting less and less as time goes on, there is a chance that everything, returns to normal. Like, we have an epidemic outbreak every couple of years or so, most of them are relatively well solved. Is this going to be that? Again, part of me is buying into the hype and saying no, but still, realistically speaking, it's somewhere between yes and it's somewhere between it might not, depending on the response, depending on a virus we can't control because we're humans. But if things go well from here, if things, like kind of recover, the big loss will be seen as, towards open borders. Again, countries with open borders, whether it was related to that fact or not, I think you could easily argue it wasn't because, again, they just happen to be popular tourist destinations. But countries with, open borders in the Schengen area are the ones which are, heaviest hit per person, for the most part. Again, exceptions, obviously being Iran and Bahrain and, there are exceptions to that rule, of course. And also there's the other interesting thing of like the countries which, because again, the first thing is that like this is a clear loss for the concept of the Schengen area. This is a clear loss for the concept of the open borders. It's going to seem, again, whether that's true or not is up for you to debate. I would argue it kind of is a exaggeration, but I mean, people see this how they see it, right? But regardless of how you see it that way, regardless of how you see each of these countries, which is a huge list, that 10 countries in 2 days, plus all the others that are no doubt going to follow, because Denmark was cancelled literally just earlier. It actually removed. I was going to Hong Kong. I mentioned can't go to Hong Kong. My flight is from Denmark. Physically not allowed into Denmark as a result of this action. Right now, you cannot get into Denmark if you are not a Danish citizen. For everyone else, the country's borders will be closed until April 14th. People arriving into Denmark will be sent back. That is, I don't even know what to think about that one. But to move on from that, let's talk about the other thing, which is the fact that the places where this initially kind of hit off, like it was huge in Japan. There was a big worry about Thailand. There was a big worry about Hong Kong. Right? Those three countries. Oh, and also Singapore was huge at one point. But if we go look at those countries now, Japan has jumped all the way. Wait, let's go down to total cases. You can see how Japan has now jumped below the UK, all the way down there at what, like 13th or something. Hong Kong is all the way down here with 132 cases, fewer than Iceland, by the way. Iceland, which doesn't even have 1 million people, it's got about 300,000. So Iceland is in a scary situation. Czechia is in a scary situation compared to Hong Kong. That's why these things are happening. But basically, these countries have limited their spread, and they are the examples to follow. China, I mean, very authoritarian. We don't really know much about what's going on there. They've stopped the spread. You can say that much. The case in Italy is the example of what not to do, clearly, because it went from, this is pretty normal, to, holy Jesus, why is everything on fire? We got, like, the examples of, like, oh, yeah, there's China, there's the Irans. But the really successful ones are the ones that were the biggest countries for a while, the Japans for a while, the Hong Kongs for a while, that have stopped the spread. And I really think the key thing to take from this is the fact that people in those countries, as soon as this happened, stepped up their already pretty good hygiene and all were willing to do it. I feel like, shutting the borders isn't the most effective thing. Japan and Hong Kong did not shut their borders. China didn't effectively, but they closed some airports and stuff. That is, it's not the effective solution. I don't imagine it will make the biggest of dents. Again, it's more like being seen as done something, because a lot of leaders are having their reputation suffer. I think the real thing you can just take is like, hey, what if we all limit our social contact, but for realsies? And also, what if we, all actually do things like that stop spreading diseases, because we shouldn't get those anyway, and now it's particularly important. The world economy is going to take a huge hit as a result of this. This is going to be, even if it stops now, like the biggest thing for a decade. If it doesn't stop soon, the biggest thing for a century. Because, obviously Spanish flu will never be beaten. Even if this goes worst case, we're still not getting to Spanish flu levels. Side note, actually, while we're here anyway, we're making a 30-minute video about a disease on a geography channel, so let's look at a map so this seems more relevant. But, a lot of people are like, hey, you can't call it the Chinese coronavirus, it's racist, which, I mean, you can't, implying that something comes from a country isn't racist. But the more serious issue from this one, the more interesting thing about that is like, well, we called it the Spanish flu, and no one was like, well, those darn Spaniards. It's just like, that's where it comes from, It's also like bird flu. We're not blaming birds. Actually, I blame birds. I blame birds for bird flu. Which, incidentally, bird flu, avian flu, was related to this. I think it was also a coronavirus. So, fun fact, did you know this is a crazy world we live in? And as someone who follows things, today got, like, especially real for me. Because, I literally am now unable to take my Qatar Airways flight. Which previously, it was like, hey, certain countries can't come in. Okay, Qatar had done that. We kind of knew that. It was a weird list of countries, an eclectic list of countries. But where things got really interesting for me was like, again, literally not being allowed into another European country. 2 EU countries. I know the UK is not in the EU, but it's sort of a thing. That's where, that's where things got kind of crazy. That like one of our closest neighbors has shut down the border. That's weird to me. The other thing is, I would say, again, something could make a comment about, haha, Brexit, am I right? Because the US hasn't banned travel to the UK, which is good given the current situation. Oh, also, I just want to mention that this is like, I was going to say it's like the 9/11 of airlines, but actually, if we, go into this article right here, the boss of British Airways, Alex Cruz, said the effect of the coronavirus was actually will be worse than 9/11. This isn't 9/11 for the airline industry, which, for the record, airline industry at 9/11, think about the correlation and the huge drop that happened afterwards. This will be worse. There are a number of airlines, I could name them all right now, but like, particularly, Norwegian, which was kind of on the edge, and now, their home country's been shut down, even though they operate a lot of flights from the UK. We're talking particularly Hong Kong. Cathay Pacific was already going under some stuff. Now it's more serious. Italian Airlines, SAS, the Scandinavian Airlines. There are so many airlines which are under huge pressure already that have just been like pushed a step further. Not every airline will collapse. I imagine we're going to see a huge, crazy thing happen in the US because every like 10 years the US airline industry needs a bailout. And I imagine across the rest of the world, a lot of airlines are going to fall as a result of this because this is, it's a level worse than 9/11 for the air industry, let alone all of the other tourist-related industries around the world. Because again, I'm getting a refund for my flight. I don't know if I get it for like 5 days. Let's hope the airline's still in business, am I right? Because I've actually got 2 separate tickets, one from London to Denmark and one from Denmark to Hong Kong via the Middle East. Hopefully they both refund. I imagine they should. It's going to be fine. But the fact that there are now millions of people in these same shoes getting refunds for the flight they've already gotten, and no one, not even other people, are booking new flights, it's pretty concerning, and you're going to see a lot of... Also, wait, my exact point was made right here. Europe is now the epicenter of the pandemic. The WHO has just backed me up 13 minutes ago. Like, that is after I start this video. I'd like to clarify. So, fun fact. The WHO backs me up on my little statement I made right there. Europe is now the area of most concern. And that is crazy, because I live in Europe, fun fact. Anyway, thank you for watching this video. I went a little bit off topic, but long story short, Argentina, the Czech Republic, and also a bunch of countries, Cyprus, Israel. Listing them all we're at the stage now where it's like, listing every country of border restrictions is going to be very, very hard. But the good news is, Africa, they're still pretty safe. And same with Greenland, actually, which is part of Denmark. So arguably it should be shaded on this map anyway. But yeah, there is also Papua New Guinea. Hats off to you guys. But also Myanmar. Closed borders. Looking like a good idea right now. I disagree with that sentiment. I think closing the borders is going to be one of the biggest things that does have an impact on the economy. It might be a worthwhile trade-off. We'll see after it's done. But yeah, Europe is now the epicenter, and I am very curious to see how this goes on. Oh look, borders shut as cases rise. Anyway, thank you very much for watching this video. Hope you all enjoyed it, because second channel, I care a little bit. Now that I'm locked inside for a couple of weeks instead of going to Hong Kong, I guess I do care. Goodbye.